Murdered a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, and left a 21-month-old baby in her crib to die. Homicide detective Larry Trotter, who I mentioned, realized that the samples were being held by the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office, so he had those samples sent off to the State Bureau of Investigation, and he learned from them the sample was sufficient and they could run a DNA test.
That's crazy. 20 years later, they still had a usable sample.
Yep. 17 years after the day that Hennis walked free from the prison, they get the results back. And the DNA profile belonged to none other than Tim Hennis. This guy got to live his life free. He got to have another child. He was out on troop events with his son's, Boy Scouts.
Being celebrated as a master sergeant and just like a good old guy and just a fist murdering scumbag.
Yep, murdered a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, a woman who was the mother of the children, and left a 21-month-old baby in her crib to die.
Another cold case has been solved thanks to advanced DNA testing. Julianne Julie Williams and Laura Lolly Winans were both 24 years old when they went on a camping trip in Shenandoah National Park in Virginia in May 1996. The two had met through a group that organized outdoor adventures, so they were so excited to be going on this trip. They left on May 19th with plans to return on the 28th, and when they did not make it home, their family called the National Park Service to report them missing. Unfortunately, after an extensive search on June 1st, Julie and Lolly were found murdered at their campsite just off the Appalachian Trail. They had been bound and gagged and their throats had been slit, but their case quickly went cold and remained that way for the past 28 years. In 2021, the FBI assigned a new team in Richmond to review the case. The team began retesting evidence and submitted it to a private lab, which was able to pull DNA from several pieces of evidence. And last week, it was announced that the FBI had identified the man responsible for killing Julie and Lolly. The DNA retrieved from the evidence was entered into CODIS, and it came back as a match to convicted serial rapist Walter Leo Jackson Sr. Jackson had a lengthy criminal history, including kidnapping and sexual, and he was also known to visit the Shenandoah National Park. He was most recently sent to prison on multiple charges in 2011, and he ended up dying in prison in March 2018. So unfortunately, he will not have to face justice for what he did to Julie and Lolly. But at least now their families have answers. The FBI has also said that they are continuing to investigate if Jackson can be connected to any other unsolved crimes and are asking for anybody with any information about him to come forward. Both Julie and Lolly loved spending time outdoors and were so excited for their camping trip when their lives were so senselessly taken. Rest in peace, Julie and Lolly.
In February 1974, 17-year-old Carla Walker was abducted from her boyfriend's car in Fort Worth, Texas, after a Valentine's Day dance. It was the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt the city for decades. 3 days later, Carla's body was found in a culvert near Lake Benbrook. She had been brutally assaulted and strangled. Shortly after the crime, Glenn McCurley was arrested as a suspect, but after passing a polygraph test, he was released by police. For over 46 years, Carla's murder remained a cold case. In September 2020, DNA recovered from Carla's clothing was sent to Othram Incorporated, a lab specializing in degraded DNA samples. DNA was also collected from Glenn McCurley's trash, and shockingly, there was a match. Further testing confirmed McCurley as the perpetrator, and he later confessed to Carla's murder, finally bringing closure to a decades-long mystery.
A 40-year-old cold case was recently solved and her killer is behind bars. Anne Pham was a 5-year-old girl taken January 21st, 1982 while walking to school in Seaside near Monterey. 2 days later, her remains were found outside Fort Ord, which was a military base. Anne was the youngest of 10 children, and a sad detail is the fact that her family were Vietnamese refugees, meaning that they'd come to the US in hopes for a better life, not a tragedy. Because she was found right outside the military base, her case was taken on by the Army Crimes Division, who couldn't solve it. Her case was then turned over to the newly created Cold Case Division of Monterey County. Through DNA found on her body, they were able to make a match to a man who was serving at that Fort Ord military base. His name is Robert John Lanou, and he's now 70, but he was 29 at the time. If this is what he did in America, I don't even want to know what kind of messed up stuff he did while he was at war. In fact, he already had a criminal history. He served 20 years in prison for SA, and he was actually already in a Nevada prison for violating parole when he was matched to the Anne Pham case. The creepiest thing is that he lived a few houses over from Anne and her family. He probably watched her and waited for an opportunity to grab her. The police chief said it best when he said, "There's no way you don't see 10 children around a property every day," but he just saw prey.
Imagine if your grandparents just disappeared, like completely without a trace. Welcome to Creep Time on TikTok with Silas Dean. This is the haunting story of Charles and Catherine Romer. On April 8th of 1980, a wealthy elderly couple named Charles and Catherine check into a Holiday Inn right off I-95. They're just on their way home from a vacation. But to put this in context, this wasn't a usual choice for them. These were two very well-off people, so to choose a Holiday Inn, it wouldn't have been typical of them. But not long after checking into their room, the couple seemingly vanished. After 2 or 3 days, hotel management became concerned that they hadn't seen the couple leave their room, so they went to go check on them. This was only to find that their room had never been slept in. Inside the room were all of their clothes, their travel diary, and over $60,000 of Catherine's jewelry. Hotel staff then goes out to the parking lot and finds that their car is missing, but no one ever saw them leave. At the time, only one witness comes forward saying that they saw this car miles away at a restaurant circuit, but after they interviewed people at the restaurant, nobody remembered seeing this couple. Despite search efforts, they were never found after that night, and no one really knows what happened to them.
This is the case of the girl that vanished into thin air. Her name is Yuki Onishi. On April 29th of 2005, 5-year-old Yuki was out celebrating Greenery Day with her mother. It's a national holiday in Japan, and what they do is they go out, they celebrate nature, and they collect bamboo shoots. So Yuki, her mom, and 60 other people were out doing this. Yuki was so excited that she found her first bamboo shoot, she showed her mother, and then she ran off to find more. That's when she disappeared and was never seen from again. When they realized that she was nowhere to be found, they actually brought in search dogs and the police. This is where it gets really strange. The dogs followed her scent to the middle of the forest and then just stopped. The scent stopped in the middle of the forest as if she had just disappeared into thin air from that spot. To this day, she has never been found and no one knows what happened. If you want to hear some theories, come back for part 2. This unsolved case is crazy. Her name is Letitia Thoreau. On May 16th of 1937, Letitia boarded a train in the first-class car headed towards central Paris. All the other cars were full, but the first-class car was empty. The train departed at 6:27 p.m., and 40 seconds later, when it reached the next stop, Letitia had been murdered. She was found with a 9-inch dagger in her neck. But no one exited the train on that stop, and no one else was in her car. So mystery goes, who took her life and why? Here's the thing, Letitia lived a double life. Apparently, she was a spy working for the Parisian detective agency. Theory goes that maybe her cover was blown, and then that's why they her. What's also weird is that her case is sealed until 2038, so maybe then we can get some answers.
At age 18, Michelle Martingo was the all-American sweetheart. 6 days before Christmas, she went to the mall in her hometown of Cedar Rapids in Iowa. And Michelle had parked her car in a dark corner in the car park. She did not really think twice about it and just went in to do her shopping. Now, actually, while she was at the mall, she bumped into her ex-boyfriend named Andy. Now, the pair did exchange pleasantries, and Michelle just went on with her business. When the mall was about to close, Michelle headed towards her car. She turned on the engine to warm up the car, and when she did that, she didn't lock her doors. At that very moment, someone opened her car and brutally stabbed her 29 times. Now, no money was stolen, and she was not essayed. At about 4 a.m. that evening, her body was discovered. Her family were rightfully devastated, and an investigation into her case was launched. Now, many in the town immediately suspected her ex-boyfriend, Andy. However, Andy's mother had provided him an alibi. She said he had made it back home by the time Michelle was attacked. However, many witnesses still thought he was somewhat involved. At the funeral, he had been acting hysterical, almost getting into the coffin with Michelle. The investigation would continue, and Andy would never be arrested. In fact, he would end up moving away and joining the Navy. And sadly, Michelle's case would go cold. However, in 2005, a detective named Doug Larson, who just so happened to have gone to school with Michelle, decided to reopen the case. And what he uncovered is truly chilling. Uploading part 2 now.
The longest prison sentence in history. Chamoy Thipiasso, born in 1940, holds the record for the longest prison sentence ever handed down. In the late 1960s, she started a Ponzi scheme in Thailand, using her connections with the Royal Thai Air Force and the Petroleum Authority of Thailand to scam over 16,000 people out of $200 million. Her scheme unraveled in the late 1980s, and at age 49, she was convicted of corporate fraud on July 27, 1989. Chamoy received a staggering sentence of 141,078 years in prison. However, due to Thai law capping sentences for fraud at 20 years, she served only a fraction of the time. With sentence reductions, she was released in 1993 at age 53.